The gun was already sighted before anyone realized she had moved. Staff Sergeant Nora Veil stepped off the Black Hawk and onto the forward operating base at Kandahar at 064 hours. And the first thing she registered was not the heat, though the heat was already brutal, a dry press against every inch of exposed skin, but the silence that followed the rotor wash, the kind of silence men make when they are deciding what to think of you. She noted the three of them standing near the fuel depot. She noted the way the tallest one, Sergeant First Class Gareth Rowe, crossed his arms the moment he saw her walk the ramp. She noted the smirk. She had been noting smirks since Fort Benning. Veil set her kit down and did not look at them again. The briefing was held in a prefab structure that smelled of burnt coffee and ballistic foam. Captain Leon Durst ran it with the particular efficiency of a man who had already decided the outcome and was working backward from there. The mission was straightforward on paper. Extract a compromised intelligence asset from a village 14 kilometers northeast of their position. A village that had been without medical resupply for 3 months. A village that sat at the edge of a dry riverbed the locals called the Throat because of what it did to sound. Swallowed it whole, made distances impossible to read. Veil will provide overwatch from the eastern ridge, Durst said, tapping the satellite image without looking at her. Rowe made a sound that was not quite a word. Durst looked up. Something, Rowe? Ridge is exposed, Rowe said. 800 meters to the nearest cover. That's a long pull in open air. Veil is aware of what 800 meters is, Durst said. Rowe said nothing, but the man beside him, a stocky specialist named Cray, leaned toward Rowe's ear and said something in a low voice, and both of them looked at the floor in the practiced way of men who know they are being watched and no longer care to hide that they don't care. Veil picked up the satellite image and studied it without being asked. She had been in the 75th Ranger Regiment for 4 years. Before that, she had spent 2 years at the Joint Sniper Course at Fort Benning, where her final practical exam scores had been circled in red by the range officer, not to flag them, but because he had never seen a female candidate shoot at that level and wanted the record to be undeniable. She had never told anyone this. The score was in her file. People who needed to know, knew. People who didn't need to know spent their time making sounds that were not quite words. She handed the satellite image back to Durst and told him she wanted to go to the ridge before last light. He said fine. She left without looking at Rowe. The ridge was worse than the image suggested. The eastern face was crumbling shale, each footfall uncertain, the loose rock shifting like something alive and reluctant. Veil climbed it alone, carrying her M110 in a soft case across her back, her spotter scope in a case on her left hip. She had requested a spotter. She had been told the team was short-handed. She understood what that meant. She reached the crest in 40 minutes and lay flat against the rock. From this position, the village was a cluster of pale structures in the gray bowl of the valley below. The dry riverbed cut through the western edge like a scar. She could see the main access road, the single structure that served as both a clinic and a meeting hall, and the 3 positions she had already mapped from the satellite image, positions that would be natural choices for anyone wanting to control movement through the valley. She spent 2 hours on the ridge before dark. She memorized the wind. It came from the northwest in the morning, shifted to the east by midday, settled in the late afternoon into something variable and unreliable that had to be read in real time. In the way the dust moved along the base of the far ridgeline, in the way the scrub brush at 300 meters stood or bent. She memorized the light, the way the sun hit the pale rock at certain angles and threw false shadows that could make a static target appear to move. She memorized the distance, not the number, but the feeling of the number. The way 800 meters looked through a scope when the air was still, and the way it looked when the heat shimmer rose off the valley floor in the midday hours. She climbed back down before dark and ate alone in the corner of the common tent. Rowe passed behind her on the way to his rack and said, "Better sleep, Carter." He said it to the tent, not to her, using the wrong name entirely. She did not look up. "Veil," she said without turning. "Staff Sergeant Veil." She heard him laugh quietly as he kept walking. It was a very specific kind of laugh, the kind that is not surprised, only confirmed. She finished eating. She cleaned her rifle. She slept. The mission launched at 0430 hours. Veil was on the ridge before the team crossed the wire. She liked it that way, liked being in position early, liked having the extra time to settle the rifle, to let her body memorize the ground. A rifle is not a separate object. Anyone who thinks it is has not been shooting long enough. The rifle is an extension of the body's stillness, and stillness is not the absence of movement. It is movement so controlled that it has become invisible. She watched through the scope as the team moved down the access road in a staggered column. 4 men, row on point, crayon rear security. The 2 others, Specialist Torres and a young private named Egan, whose hands had been shaking at the briefing, positioned in the middle. And 50 meters back, barely visible in the pre-dawn gray, the intelligence asset they were here to extract. A woman in her late 40s who had been passing targeting data to U.S. forces for 16 months and who had been compromised 8 days ago when her contact handler made a mistake that got his cover blown. The asset's name was not in the brief. Veil had noted this. She watched the team enter the village perimeter. Everything was still. The light was beginning to come over the eastern ridgeline, soft and gray, touching the tops of the pale structures without illuminating them. The way light enters a room before it fills it. Veil breathed slowly. Her trigger finger rested outside the guard. Her eye never left the scope. She saw the movement before she understood it. 300 meters to the team's northwest. A figure that had not been there a moment ago, now behind the low wall of the second structure from the road. Then another farther back, near the entrance, to the dry riverbed. Then a third, and this one had something on his shoulder that the morning light had not yet reached. But Veil had been staring at that valley for 2 hours in the dark, and she did not need the light. She keyed her radio. Contact north, 3 positions. Northwest corner of structure 2, riverbed entrance, and 50 meters up the slope from the well. Durst's voice came back. Copy. Can you confirm weapons? She had already confirmed, she said. Hold, Durst said. She held. The team had stopped moving. She could see Rowe go to a knee. She could see him scanning northwest. She could see that he could not see what she could see, because he was looking from ground level through terrain that swallowed angles. She was looking from above through a scope that she had spent 2 hours aligning to this exact valley floor. She keyed the radio again. Rowe is looking into the wrong sector. The northwest position is behind the wall, not in front of it. He needs to move to the east side of the road or he will not see it until it fires. A pause. Then Rowe's voice on the channel, flat and slow. I've got eyes on, Veil. Stand by. He did not have eyes on. She watched. The figure behind the wall shifted position. It was a small movement, a repositioning of weight, the kind of adjustment a person makes when they have been crouched for a long time and need to relieve pressure on a leg. She had made that exact movement herself, in exactly that kind of position, more times than she could count. She recognized it the way you recognize the syntax of a language you have been speaking since childhood. Rowe, she said. He is adjusting his firing position. 20 seconds. You need to move east now. Another pause. Veil, I said I have eyes on. The figure behind the wall stopped adjusting. Veil did not wait. The first shot broke the stillness of the valley like something that had always been about to happen. The figure behind the wall dropped without finishing the movement that would have ended Rowe. The second shot came while the echo of the first was still traveling. The figure at the riverbed entrance, who had begun to rise at the sound of the first shot, sat back down and did not rise again. The third was 4 seconds later because the figure on the slope had gone to ground at the sound of the first 2. And Veil had to track the movement, read the new position, allow for the change in angle from ground level to her elevation. She found him. Silence returned to the valley. She was already scanning for the 4th position, the one she had not fully confirmed but suspected, because 3 is rarely the whole story. When Durst's voice came over the radio, he said only her name, not a question, not an order, just her name. The way you say something when language is not enough, but you need to use it anyway. Clear to proceed? She asked. Clear to proceed, he said. The extraction took 11 minutes. The asset was moved from the clinic to the waiting vehicle without incident. Torres found a 4th position on the way out, a fighting hole near the northern edge of the village, empty, recently used, abandoned in the immediate aftermath of Veil's first shot. Whoever had been in it had decided the math was not in their favor. Veil remained on the ridge until the vehicle was through the wire. Then she broke down her position, policed her brass, and climbed back down the shale face she had climbed up in the dark 4 hours ago. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. It was the thing people never understood. Not the accuracy, not the patience, but the steadiness. Where does it come from? People asked when they asked at all. She had never figured out how to explain that it does not come from anywhere. It is not the absence of fear. It is not calm. It is something closer to clarity. The moment when everything that is not the shot falls away, and what remains is only the calculation and the breath, and the knowledge that you have prepared for exactly this. She arrived back at the FOB at 0712. Rowe was standing near the vehicle bay. He looked at her for a long moment. He was not smirking. He was not doing anything, in fact, that she recognized from the men who had looked at her the way he had looked at her yesterday morning. He was just standing there with the expression of a man who has been operating on a set of assumptions for a very long time and has just been handed evidence that contradicts all of them. You called the fourth position, he said. I called 3 positions, she said. I suspected the fourth. He nodded slowly. She kept walking. It was Captain Durst who found the anomaly. 2 weeks later, in the debrief review that followed any engagement, he was cross-referencing the signal's intelligence from the day of the extraction and noticed something that should not have been there. The communication that had coordinated the ambush, the transmission that had gone out 6 hours before their mission launched, the one that had placed 3 gunmen and 1 lookout in exactly the right positions to intercept a 4-man team moving through that specific valley on that specific morning, had not originated from the region at all. The origin point, when it was finally traced, was a base communications node in Bagram. Durst read the report twice before he called the intelligence officer. He read it a 3rd time before he called anyone else. Veil was told on a Thursday morning. She was sitting on an equipment crate outside the armory, cleaning the M110 the way she cleaned it every morning. Not because it needed it, but because the routine kept her sharp. Because the routine was itself a kind of preparation. Durst sat down on the crate beside her and laid the printed report between them without saying anything first. She read it. She set it down. She picked up the bolt assembly and continued what she had been doing. Bagram, she said. The node traces to Bagram, Durst said. That's as far as the trace goes officially. The investigation is above my pay grade now. How long has it been going on? Durst was quiet for a moment. The analyst thinks the pattern goes back at least 2 years, probably longer. Someone has been feeding operational timing to external contacts, not targets, not tactical details, just timing, just enough. Veil turned the bolt assembly in her hands. 2 years ago, she had been at Fort Campbell, serving as assistant team leader on a composite unit. 2 years ago, her team had run a night operation in the Arghandab River Valley that went wrong in a way that had never made sense to her. 3 men from her platoon had been hit in a position they had held for fewer than 40 minutes. The timing had been so precise, so exact, that the debrief had called it an intelligence failure at the enemy level, meaning that the enemy simply had very good intelligence. She had written that in her own section of the after-action report, enemy possessed accurate operational timing. She had carried that sentence for 2 years. She looked at the report again. Has anyone contacted the families? She said. Durst looked at her. Veil, Sergeant Kira Homestead, she said. Specialist David Cho. Private First Class James Argueta. She said the names the way she had said them every morning for 2 years, the same way she cleaned the rifle. Their families. Have they been contacted? It's early, Durst said. The investigation? I'm not asking about the investigation, she said. I'm asking about 3 families who spent 2 years being told their people died because of an intelligence gap. Durst did not answer right away. She gave him the time. I'll make some calls, he said finally. She nodded once, set the bolt assembly back in place, and ran the action twice to confirm the feel. Smooth, certain. She allowed herself 60 seconds not to grieve, or not only to grieve. In 60 seconds, you cannot undo 2 years. You cannot give back what was taken from 3 families or from herself, from the version of herself that had spent 24 months quietly certain that something had been wrong with that night in Arghandab and had no language for it that anyone would accept. You cannot undo any of it. But in 60 seconds, she let herself feel the full weight of knowing that she had been right, that the timing had been deliberate, that the names she carried were not the cost of war in the impersonal sense, but the cost of betrayal in the most specific sense. A deliberate act by a person sitting at a communications node in Bagram, typing a message that ended with coordinates and a window of time. She felt the grief. She felt the anger. She felt something underneath both of those that was harder to name. The particular ache of a person who has spent years carrying something true that no one else would confirm, and who has finally been confirmed and who is not relieved by it because confirmation does not mean restoration. 60 seconds. Then she picked up the rifle and stood. The investigation took 4 months. Veil was not part of it, officially. She submitted her after-action testimony and her recollection of the Arghandab operation and was told she would be contacted if additional information was needed. She was contacted twice. She gave what she had clearly and without embellishment. The man behind the Bagram node was a signals warrant officer named Raymond Steck. He had been coordinating operational timing to a regional proxy network for 31 months, motivated, as these things usually are, not by ideology, but by debt, and the particular desperation that debt produces in people who have more to lose than they can admit. He had never met the men who used his information. He had received his contact assignments through a cutout in Kabul and had told himself, in the way people tell themselves things that do not survive contact with the truth, that he was not responsible for what happened on the other end of the messages. Steck was arrested on a morning in March. The details were not published. They rarely are. Veil learned about the arrest from Durst, who called her on her mobile phone with the simplicity of a man who has been waiting to deliver one piece of news for a long time. He did not add commentary. He said Steck had been taken into custody, that the families of Homestad, Cho, and Argueta had been formally briefed, and that the Army was preparing a revised after-action summary for the Arghandab operation. Veil thanked him. She ended the call. She was standing in the parking lot of a PX at Fort Liberty, where she had been reassigned 3 weeks earlier to begin the process of becoming a lead instructor at the Joint Sniper course. It was a gray morning, the sky low and undecided, the parking lot empty except for a single Humvee, with a dead battery being jump-started by 2 soldiers who were arguing pleasantly about the procedure. She looked at the sky for a moment. Then she went inside and bought a cup of coffee and sat at a table near the window and did not think about anything in particular for a little while. Outside, the 2 soldiers got the Humvee started. The engine turned over and caught, and they both laughed. The uncomplicated laugh of a problem solved, a mechanism restored, a thing working the way a thing is supposed to work. The first class she taught was a group of 12, 7 men, 5 women. On the first day, she did not talk about herself. She did not talk about Kandahar or Arghandab or the ridge above the throat or any of it. She talked about ballistics. She talked about the relationship between wind and time of flight. She talked about the difference between a shooter who understands the math and a shooter who has internalized it. The gap between knowing the number and feeling the number, which is the only gap that matters when the target is real and the conditions are not what you planned for. One of the students, a young ranger, early 20s, the particular overconfidence of someone who has scored well on every qualifier and not yet been tested by a situation the qualifiers didn't predict, asked her how you get to that point, the internalized point, the feeling not knowing point. She thought about it. You take every shot available to you, she said, in every condition, in wind and cold and heat, and when you're tired, and when your position is wrong, and when the angle is wrong, you take the shot in all of it. And eventually the conditions stop being obstacles and start being information. He nodded, the nod of a person who has understood the sentence and not yet understood the thing the sentence is pointing at. She recognized the nod. She had given it herself once. Give it time, she said without judgment. It doesn't rush. She turned back to the board. Outside the window, the range was set up for the afternoon session. Targets at 3 distances, flags at the midline to read the wind. She had positioned them herself, before class, in the early morning when the light was still gray and the parking lot was empty. And she had stood at the firing line for a long time, looking at the far targets the way she had looked at the valley above the throat on that first night, learning it by heart, making it hers before the situation required anything of her. The preparation was not separate from the courage. It never had been. That was what she taught them, in the end, not the math, not the mechanics, though she taught those too. She taught them that readiness is not a moment. It is an accumulation of quiet mornings and small choices and the willingness to know a thing so thoroughly that when the moment arrives, the knowledge is already inside you, already working, already done. Some of them got it quickly. Some of them needed time. She had time.